Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and joined as always by Francois Geoffrey. Francois, how are you today?
I am great. How are you?
Good. I'm a little hopped up on sugar, not gonna lie. We got a little surprise. Did you get a surprise bubble tea?
No.
Oh,
Now I
well,
feel left out.
I'm sorry. They're little
It's
baby
fine.
bubble
I've had
teas.
enough. I've had enough bubble tea. When I was in, we used to get bubble tea pretty often when we were in California, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because there were so many Asian restaurants around. It was just like, yeah, why not? Just toss it in there. It's only extra like $2. Why not?
Tell you what, though, like calorically, it is so bad for you.
Whatever. You can't count happiness. You can count calories, but you can't count happiness.
Well, and that's why it's like it's a treat. It's like, one, it was a treat because it was a surprise, and then also it's like, okay, here's my, like, I don't know how much sugar for the day, but it looks like they got half sugar, which is good. And I don't know where this came from. Mimosa was just like, hello, here's bubble tea. I was like, thank you so much.
Ooh, okay. I'll have to grab one after the pod.
I think she said somebody dropped him off for Jay for Chinese New Year. The gift giving has begun. So
yeah. And that's a quick actually reminder before we get started that Chinese New Year is coming up. It starts at the end of this week. A lot of factory workers have already started leaving. If you are listening to this live, if you're listening to this after the fact, you've probably felt these effects starting back in November, December. Or at least I hope that you started having those conversations even earlier than that, June, July, August, probably of last year. So if you're placing orders now, if you are trying to rework issues, whatever the case is, it's going to be a struggle. I would suggest, just reach out to your supplier. It's a time that they are starting to decompress as well after the year long of stress, where they can actually travel back to their homes, their families. Everyone is off. It's across the board logistics usually. Factory workers, definitely. A lot of offices are closed. Just reach out to them. Wish them a happy new year, happy Chinese New Year. If you could send them a gift, send them a gift. I mean, what's $50, $100 to just keep them happy at the end of the day? So,
and doesn't WeChat actually have that feature that you can send red envelopes through?
Envelopes. I don't know if that's a US feature. I think you might have have to have it linked to a Chinese bank account. I think. I'm not completely sure. I could be wrong. I know Chuan sent us some a couple years back. I don't know if he still does. He might do it every year. But it's a fun little thing. I mean, you don't have to send them, thousands of dollars, a couple $100 even to keep a working relationship intact and keep them happy. I think is well worth the investment.
I would definitely agree. And something else to hit up at the top of the episode, not really Chinese New Year related or anything, but there's a really exciting virtual summit going on. So we're recording this on the 25th of January. If you're watching live, Takeometrics is hosting AdMax tomorrow. It is a just information-packed, jam-packed a virtual summit. That's what it is. They really wanted to create like the in-person conference experience just virtually. So less of a webinar and more of like actual
an engaging conference. Right?
There's going to be like
1
sessions.
day or 2 day?
So that their website shows that it's 2 days. It shows January 26th and 27th from 1 to 4. I did see another ad though that said it was just the 26th. But regardless of if it's on Thursday as well, we know it's tomorrow. So
and they have so many awesome speakers that are going to be there. And these are speakers that have not necessarily inside information, but they are, ear to the ground at all times about ads.
It's the folks who like run the back end of Takeometrics.
It seems silly not to attend. It's free is the biggest thing. Right. I mean, this is something that you could easily charge. And let's start off also by saying we are not sponsored. We're not paid.
No, they're just friends.
It is
just friends.
Takeometrics, they're an awesome company, awesome brand. Check them out. Check out AdMax. Again, going on tomorrow, Wednesday, January 26th, if
Mm-hmm.
you are listening to this live or on the YouTube after the
Yes,
fact.
on the YouTube.
On the YouTube.
Well, we have spent 6 minutes of what we can call shameless self-promotion, even though it's for friends and talking about things we want to talk about just personally. But let's talk about something else very interesting, the whole reason that we're
Yes.
here today. Let's bring on Josh Fonger. We are here to talk about working the system. What the system is. I mean, there's so many. Is there one? Is there like a magical unicorn system? What do we hear about?
Well, everything is a system, right? Everything has a start, has an end, and progresses through time. And so, what we work on is systemizing your business.
Awesome. And thank you again for being here. So I know that there's a book called Work the System. Which came first, the book or the enterprise?
Yeah, good question. So the book right here, for those watching the video, Work the System, Sam Carpenter wrote this book in 2008. And actually, it was a manifesto initially for his employees. He runs a call center out of Bend, Oregon, and he wanted to make sure that his employees understood this whole concept in the book, which is the systems mindset, and they understood why they were going to start organizing their business in a systematic way. And as he started writing, he realized, well, this could help other companies as well. And then, so over the years, he's refined it. We've applied it. It's in its fourth edition now. And, the consulting and coaching is what I do. Was started because so many people read the book and they realized, well, can you help us, fix our businesses?
Mhm.
And the whole book is about how Sam took his life, which was 100-hour work weeks, and he worked himself down to 2-hour work weeks, and his income went up 20 times. And he kind of shares how he did that by getting control of the systems of his business and his life. And he didn't want to then go out and get busy being a consultant. And so I got brought in about 2010, 11 in that time frame, and have been with him ever since in terms of helping other companies, get the systems mindset and then get control of their business systems.
Now I hear 100-hour work week to a 2-hour work week and immediately think, well, we need to read this book. But two, it just sounds like my immediate thought is kind of delegation, because that's usually how I feel a lot of business owners are able to, minimize the number of hours that they're working, is just purely by delegating. How much of that plays a role in the systems?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Is that if you're doing all the work yourself, which a lot of owners are, depending on the size of the business, the owners and managers carry a heavy burden. Um, Delegating is part of it, but we would say that is downstream from actually understanding that the world's a collection of systems, and your business is. How you answer the phone, how you process a check, how you handle a customer complaint, are all these separate pieces that make up what we call a business. And first, you need to see that your business is not just this swirling mass of chaos where there's always fires to put out, there's always urgencies, there's always things to run and do, where people just they burn through a whole week and they don't even feel like they did anything. And realize first, okay, let's understand the fundamental pieces of life, which is you get up in the morning, you drive to work. There's these pieces that happen again and again and again, and the same in your business. First, you have to see that. And then you realize, well, now that I see these separate systems, I could probably control them. I could maybe automate them. I could delete them. I could delegate them. I could improve them. There's some things I could do to control those elements. And for me, the big insight was that my marriage was a system, and realizing that if I wanted to have this optimal marriage, well, there's certain components that make that up. Maybe there's a date night. Maybe there's going for walks. Maybe there's, praying together. There's certain pieces I could actually architect, I could engineer that would then create the result I want. And so we want to make sure that people understand, well, how do you understand the world and or your business is these collection of systems. You probably want to know, what do you want? Like, what do you want out of this business? Do you want it to be a lifestyle business, or do you want it to be, $100 million business? Like, do you want it to have multiple locations, or do you want it to have, one location, but license what you're doing? Like, what are you actually trying to build? And owners tend to like to keep that in their head along with everything else in their head, and then and around them doesn't have a chance to help them get that vision and make it become a reality, because it's never been taking time to put on the paper. And so we help people first get the systems mindset, and then we help them document what is this direction or what they're trying to actually build. And we call it the strategic objective. And so once people have this one-page document that says, this is exactly what we want to build, this is how we want to build it, this is who we want to build it for, this is what it's going to look like, here's things we're going to say yes to or no to, and it's out there, then the business, the weight of the business is no longer on the shoulders of the owner. Now it's separate. The owner's here, the business is separate from them, and the owner and everyone else can have a perspective where they're looking down on their business and their lives and this strategic objective and say, okay, this is all what we're going to build together, and now let's go about objectively focused on these mechanics. That's really the kind of the fundamental cultural strategic shift we help people go through first, and then downstream, yes, it's going to be delegation. It's going to be actually writing working procedures. It's going to be those very specific tactical management techniques.
Gotcha. That's an interesting perspective in viewing your marriage as a system. Francois
Very
is
romantic, right?
the soon to be married man, so maybe something to consider as you enter this next chapter.
Well, thinking about it, I think that you can look at it as a system. I think what I tend to call it, and it's just a far less professional way, it's just things that you do, right? A thing that you might do on a Friday night is watch a movie together every Friday. And realistically, yeah, that could be a system. That's bonding time. Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's just a different word to use, I guess, than what your significant other might want to hear.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it mechanizes something that people feel is very human. But some of the clients I have are artists, right? And so they might say, well, no one could create what I do. It's very creative, and they try to add all these words to it, and it might be, but ultimately there are some very specific things. You're going to have this time where you meet with the client, and they tell you exactly what they want out of the piece of art that you're designing for them, or the logo you're designing, or the label you're designing. So you have this first meeting, then you have this preliminary meeting where you show them a few design concepts, and then you have there's sequential things that you do in the creative process, instead of just saying, well, it's creative and no one else can do it. Well, actually, if you broke it down to the pieces, there are probably certain things people could help you do those certain pieces, and there's certain pieces that you probably could do better. And I had one client that did design labels, and you realized that if you broke it out into the separate pieces, the process took half as long and half as many back and forth with the client, and they were willing to pay more for it. So he realized, wow, I never thought about my design process as a process. I just thought I was a designer, and it was creative, and it was collaborative, and that kind of business doesn't scale.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely I feel a certain element of grit that a lot of time business owners just want to go through, and they feel the need to go through it, and it just keeps adding on, right? Like you said, you're always putting out fires, and as much grit as you have, there's only so many hours in the work week, in the week itself, but definitely in like your capable work week. Right. So where does it start, though? I know you mentioned that it really starts with a mindset shift. But what is something practical, let's say, that a business owner can start doing tomorrow? They wake up tomorrow. What's the first thing that they should do?
Yeah, well, one of the exercises we make owners go through, and it's not the funnest exercise, but is to actually write down what do you do throughout the day, and actually list it out in a very tedious way. And you'll realize, wow, a lot of the things I'm doing, maybe I shouldn't be doing, but I've never taken the time to document. Or some of the things I'm doing in the wrong order. So I'm not doing them during my biological prime time, or that I'm doing them as distractions, like they're not the best use of time. I probably should just delete them completely. And so a big part of what we do is, slicing apart the owner's day, the owner's time, and managers and employees can do this as well. And then it's realizing, wow, I'm, I don't know, scheduling these meetings on my calendar. You know what? If I just wrote down how to do it, someone else could do it. And that's ultimately what we want to do. I mean, going back to Lisa's point in terms of delegation, is once you take the time to write down all the things you do, then you realize a number of them actually you wouldn't have to do if you took the time to actually make them into a working procedure. And so that's a big thing. And in the book, Sam details this great story where he used to take the checks that were delivered and physically delivered. This is a few decades ago, and he'd bring them to the bank and deposit them. And he realized, well, why am I going 3 times a week to deposit checks? If I just wrote a procedure on how to do this, someone else could do this. It seems so obvious, right? But you get in these habits. People get into these well-worn paths where they're used to doing certain things, they're comfortable doing certain things, and they're really good at doing certain things. They never stop to think, what actually could someone else do this? And another mental exercise would be, if my company was 10 times bigger, would I still be doing this task? And if the answer is no, well, then you need to start moving towards the direction of getting it mechanized and documented so that as your team grows, you're not doing that task anymore. So you might not hand it off tomorrow, but this is something I'm going to need to hand off. So I need to build my company strategically so I can hand it off. And so that would be the other thing to think about.
I love that. And you said something that piqued my interest in there, that taking a really kind of fine-toothed comb to their day and seeing when they're doing things, and they're not doing it during biological prime time. What?
Yeah. So in the book, there's a lot of concepts that Sam Carpenter learned by shifting his life, and this all. I mean, it's a really good book. I would recommend reading it just because when you read a book and you physically have it, it reminds you again and again and again of something that you want. And so I'm a believer in actually having physical books. But biological prime time is when you have the most energy. So you probably notice infomercials are on in the middle of the night to sell you things you don't really need because you're the least amount of energy, the least amount of willpower, the least ability to do something useful and productive. It's the middle of the night. But flip that and think about your own life. You typically have a strong amount of energy towards the morning. Once the morning grogginess wears off, there's probably a 4-hour stretch where you're pretty solid. You can do some pretty intense work. And then there's this lull that happens when you need to take a break. Maybe it's lunchtime. And then you have a smaller amount of time. This is just normal humans. Not everyone's like this. That happens in the mid to late afternoon where you can actually focus, do some pretty intensive work. And then it tends to fade off, and towards the evening time, you could give yourself some willpower and drink a bunch of coffee and try really hard to get focused, but it's just not the same. It takes an enormous amount of effort, and you don't work as fast. You make more mistakes, and it's smarter to just realize this is human. This is how I'm built. And so maybe between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., you're not calling your mom and getting groceries, right? Like these are the times when you're doing the things that are hard for you, that are difficult for you, that involve the most of your mental capacity. And maybe you call your mom at 4:00 while you're driving to the grocery store. Like you pick different times of the day to do the things that require different amounts of energy. And so what we try to tell people is that if you're going to fix the systems of your business, the mechanical systems, you want to do that during your biological prime time, because that work is difficult. It requires some intensity. It requires some focus. It requires some discipline that you probably are not going to have at the end of the day, but you do have it in the beginning of the day. And so we want to make sure people protect that time and use that time effectively, as opposed to, I'll get to that when I have time. Well, you're not going to have time for that hard thing. You better just do the hard thing first. And we want to arrange people's days, but it's amazing how often people will take their biological prime time and they will use it for things that are, just processing through emails, taking some sales calls, that, just things that they probably wouldn't need to do, but they're just, again, they're in a habit. Or worse yet, and more common, is that they react to what is coming towards them. And the whole idea of the work system method is that you have set the course of what you want to build. You've set the course of what you want to control. And so you set the course of you control your time. You're not a victim of what is coming at you. If you're a leader or manager or owner, you likely have some control. And so you start off by protecting that time and energy with what is going to have the 5, 10, 100 times the result, instead of just, this person can only meet this time, and I've got to run this errand, and my brother's calling me, and you kind of lose all of that power that was in that time of energy.
Mm.
I love that. I think Francois is one of those people who's built for being really productive at night. He's not built like the rest of us.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of my background's in industrial engineering, and so it sounds a lot like a time study or like doing a Gemba walk on yourself almost. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Gemba walks, it's basically walking through systems and processes one step at a time. And it started back at Toyota. Actually, one of their engineers walked through the entire production line and met with the internal customers and said, "Oh, okay, well, these are the methods that we could actually improve. This is where you're spending a lot of time. This is what we can move to a different." It was a very methodical way to break apart the systems and processes that they actually had in place without actually everything that you're saying, without them even knowing that they had these issues. No, it's interesting. Where do you find? Well, I guess, how do you help them find the time when they are being reactive, when there are things that come up? Let's say you have a client that's just overbearing. They're calling you all the time. And then on top of that, you had plans to do some creative work to lay out for your marketing team. And then maybe there's just so much that adds up in the day, right? How do you not be reactive to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it might take a while. I mean, whatever you've wound up in your life over the course of many years, it takes you a while to unwind. Right.
Okay.
And so we're not going to say, well, you just do this and then instantly things are better. But typically it starts with removing some things that you used to believe, oh, I must do it this way because I've always done it this way. And realizing there's probably some things that you've just built in that you could probably actually stop doing completely, or you could stop doing for a month, or like so some things you probably just want to delete from your schedule. And client interactions is a great example of that, where you say, well, there's this overbearing client, and then I'll say to the person I'm working with, well, have you ever set up a protocol of working with this client so that you prevent the fires from happening? Maybe where you say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I know there's a lot of dynamic things going on, so we're going to set up a Monday huddle from this time to this time, and then a Wednesday end of the day meeting, and then Friday at lunchtime, and we're going to have these set times because I don't want things to boil over, and I want to whatever that might be. And then you've then controlled the relationship, you've prevented the fires, and then you don't have those situations anymore because you've actually been proactive with building the systems, and then this is the best time to meet. And so it's the same with any client relationship. If you've not defined the times to be effective with them, they're going to just call you and email you whenever they feel like it because you haven't set boundaries. And so I think it's a big thing is setting up boundaries. And then if your quality is good, and we're talking very generically here, client relationships, if your quality is good, then typically you can raise your prices. And that's typically something that we'll do for those who are professionals, whether it's design professionals or they're business consultants or whatever it might be, is to, lawyers, is to raise their prices so that they end up making more money and they end up working less because some of their clients can no longer afford those particular fees. And then they kind of already have gotten more time and they've gotten more money to invest in building a team and of course, building their systems.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Yeah, that's I feel it's different for every industry, right? Yep. Someone that is a lawyer or runs a small mom and pop is going to be incorporating different systems and process than, let's say, an e-commerce brand that's scaling. And there's so many aspects to it, right? I mean, when you boil it down, there's the marketing aspect, which takes up a lot of time, but also the supply chain aspect, right? The sourcing, the factory relationship or supplier relationships, the logistics and distribution, that it's endless fires to put out over the past 24 months, I feel.
Yeah.
What have you seen is effective to sort of cut out time? Because you do work with e-commerce businesses and brands, correct?
Yeah. So basically, people who get our book, it's around the world, right? So any industry and any country, we probably had clients in those particular areas, and so it is broad in that spec. aspect. But yeah, I have worked with some e-commerce businesses and some in great detail, whether it's supplement companies or I had this one company that did wearable tattoos. I've got a car wash I'm working with right now. It's got an e-commerce business of selling parts. They have an inventory, and so they're having a lot of supply chain issues
Yeah.
right now. And so yeah, I think that the one thing that I've seen, especially nowadays, if this is current, is that as prices go up dramatically and as time frames expand dramatically, the person um, who's I'll just use his car wash as an example. Um, he was afraid to raise prices, and he was
Mm.
afraid to tell his customers that it would take longer. And I said, "Well, is everyone else in your industry having the same situation?" He's like, "Yeah." And I said, "So you're not going to, you know, make someone angry such that they're going to go to somewhere else because they're going to have the exact same issue somewhere else. And so
Right.
you have to follow the market. So the market is okay. It's going to take an extra 6 months, and the prices have gone up 30%. Well, then you communicate with your customer. This is what's going to happen, right?
Mm.
And you have to stay on top of it as opposed to, hey, they're upset it's taking so long, and I'm not making any money anymore. Well, that's your fault. Your fault for not communicating with the customer about the reality. And so if everyone is experiencing the same thing, then you just need to communicate with your customer. They have nowhere else to go. Hopefully, there's more to your relationship with the customer than just uh, just those aspects, price alone.
Yeah.
And then they're going to stick with you because they know it's going to be the same everywhere else. And so that was a big mental shift, is realizing that he just waited and waited and waited. Well, maybe it'll eventually work itself out, or maybe it eventually. I'm like, no, you're this whole period you lost, a lot of money. So you just bite the bullet and do it now. And he didn't lose any of his customers, right? But I think a lot of it just was this fear that, and some customers. I think this is the other thing that people who have delay is that they think that their customers want it now, want it now, want it now, but they realize that some customers actually are fluid with time frames, and some customers
Mm.
actually are fluid with price fluctuations that you just might not be aware of. And so I think communication is a key aspect during times like we've experienced the last 2 years.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that same conversation, we've had that conversation a few times of brands not wanting to increase prices because they're worried that a competitor, let's say, might not increase prices as quickly. And a lot of products you search up, let's say coffee mug or tumbler, you'll find hundreds of the same product usually. That is very transactional. It's harder to keep a communication, let's say on Amazon. Another aspect of this, and you were touching on it earlier, but is teams,
Mhm.
right? And incorporating this into your teams, I think, is fundamental, right? Because if the leadership is constantly going under this chaotic stress where you're constantly putting out fires, you can't really lead your team, guide your team to where you want to be. The business could fail. What is the first step with, I guess, the leadership and incorporating this into their lives and then into their team and into their business?
Yeah, well, I would go back to, and it's a great question. I would go back to that strategic objective and say, hey, hey, company, team, yes, there's going to be ups and downs with regards to health, like we're going through right
Mhm.
now, or with supply chains, or with competition, or with technology, or also disruption. That's going to be part of it. But in the end, here's what we're about. Here's the direction we're going. Here's how we're going to differentiate ourselves. So they need to have a firm foundation that even as there's ebbs and flows and market crashes and political disruptions and all that stuff, they know in the end we're going to stay true to this. And as long as we keep marching or running or sprinting or crawling this direction, we're going to set ourselves apart from the competition. We're going to stick it out long term, and we're going to be different. And I think that's probably a key thing for you mentioned these e-commerce stores is if you are just like everyone else, then it's going to be a race to the bottom, and
Mm.
that you don't want to be in a business like that. I mean, I was working with a car parts company that was at an e-commerce store, and I got to working with them, and they hadn't innovated or bet about anything except for low prices for 4 years, and then it was just too
Mm.
late. Like
Hmm.
they were just too late for them to even compete with the larger competitors. But you want to, again, your team needs to know that first, and then investing in the systems of the business makes sense if you actually have an overriding strategy that the team thinks themselves, oh yeah, this does make sense to invest in the infrastructure because we're going somewhere. If it's just we sell tumblers at the lowest prices, well then people are like, well, why bother investing in any infrastructure because we're not really about something different. We're not really about something that's going to be enduring. We're really just trying to make a quick buck while this is popular, but then we have nothing. And I think that those who follow innovative trends, there's a lot of money, right? I had someone approach me a couple of years ago who wanted to get involved in making masks. I wasn't interested, but I'm sure they made a lot of money on making masks. But eventually, the making masks business is going to get saturated, competitive, race to the bottom, and then it's like, well, now it's going to be hard work, and you might as well just go out of business. And I at least our approach is for owners who actually want to build something of value long term, so they can either sell it, they can have a self-managing business, or they can retire, whatever it might be, pass it on to their kids. If you don't have that vision, if you want to be a worker bee in your business forever, like just stay self-employed, then just grind it out. But I think that gets old, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years into business. And then you're like, wait a second, I'm still where I was on year one. Something's wrong about the way I'm doing this. And that's what Sam detailed in his book, Work the System, was he worked the same way for 15 years straight. And since it was a 24/7 call center, he just got rid of his apartment and just lived at the business. He just slept on the floor. He just would answer the calls at 3 a.m. He could not leave the business. And his kids had bunk beds at the business because that's where they lived. Right. That's how horrible it got. And then he realized, okay, I need to do something different. I can't keep running the business where I know it all. I do it all. I'm the hero. I have to make it about the systems.
Mm-hmm. Is it almost like a two-pronged approach, or like a part one, part two when implementing the systems mindset? And I ask that because it seems like there's kind of two halves. One is unlearning and undoing and kind of weaving, or however you phrased it before, the old parts and how it used to be done. And then, okay, here's where we want to go. Like, can you work on them simultaneously, or are they almost counterproductive?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say the systems of your business already all exist. Like, you have a way of selling. It might not be, fluid. It might not be consistent, but you have a way of doing it. You have a way of ordering product. Like, everything in your business currently is operational. It just might not have been thought of systematically, and it might not be the way you want, and it might be done differently no matter who does it. So they all exist. So you start with the perspective, okay, the systems of my business, they do exist. They're just they're not documented, they're chaotic. Now, let me start to identify them all. And we do it through a procedure project plan. And let me just start to prioritize which one I want to work on. So in Sam's company, there's over 300 documented procedures, but you can only fix one at a time, or at least each person involved can only fix one at a time. So you just pick the one that is either pressing, like you're doing it right now. Like, let's say you're hiring an employee right now. Well, you should probably work on your procedure called how to interview an employee, because you're doing it right now, and then document it as you go. So that's one approach. The other one is to say, hey, there's this problem we have where 20% of our orders, they get refunded. We're doing something wrong. Okay, that's a problem. And there's probably 2 or 3 systems associated with that. Maybe it's the description of the product. Maybe it's the delivery packaging. Maybe it's the customer service afterwards, whatever those things are. And then you tackle the systems that lead to the bad result, knowing that when the systems are fixed, that result will stop. It'll get better, right? So that would be an approach where you identify a problem and then you focus on those systems. But you can't, I would say it's less about unraveling. It's more about improving, right? It's improving what you are currently doing, because whatever you're doing, I mean, you're making money, you're in business. So whatever you're doing must be working to some degree. And wholesale shifts typically are risky and unnecessary. So it's more about you're doing something, let's look at it and let's make it a lot better. Let's document it. Let's move on to the next and the next and the next. And the unraveling for the leaders and the owners would be, I'm doing something, and in the process of making it better, I should just not do it at all. And that is going to be probably a multi-year process to make that happen.
Mm. And so I know you, for example, you mentioned the interviewing process, and I would put that into a bucket of almost HR, right? There are a few pillars of business, and we could break them up into, let's say, sales, marketing, operations, and finance, the 3 core pillars. Um, how, for a business owner that maybe this is their first business, and we've seen a lot of this over the past 5-10 years with Amazon, especially, and just e-commerce booming, where someone was able to make this or turn this from, let's say, a side hustle that maybe they were selling a few products to multi-million-dollar businesses, 8-9-figure businesses. And then speaking to, for example, our friends at Escala and Multiply Me, they have experience with some of these businesses just not really putting together standard operating procedures and systems and processes. And these are very successful businesses. I guess if you don't have the mind, or if you don't have the know-how and the thought to say, hey, these are the pillars, these are the buckets that I'm going to start putting these systems and processes in, where do you start? I guess, is there like a white paper or anything that you would suggest where, hey, these are the core aspects of the business? I could break apart marketing and put in paid advertising, listing optimization, all these different buckets in there. And then maybe customer service might go, I guess, how do you organize your business when it's been so chaotic?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And our approach is, instead of start with a bunch of organized folders, we start with going to the people. This is when we do our consulting, and then just talking to them. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And typically they have no job descriptions, and typically they just say, well, I just, I go into work and I, whatever, I sell. And we say, well, what do you actually do on Monday morning? And then just got to work through. And so we let it grow organically. So as opposed to here's the standard things that every business should have. Every business should have this and this and this. We will instead actually go to them and say, what are you actually doing? Then we'll start that way. Ultimately, like you said, it gets organized by the standard things, sales, marketing, finance. Typically have some IT things, some strategic things, HR, admin, operations. So there are those standard things. And we do recommend people get some kind of documentation software, or at least a place to save it. And the most common way people save things is by department. But we don't fill all that in with a bunch of empty documents first, or empty folders. We start with, hey, clean slate. Where's their problem? Oh, there's a problem with, or like, let's say we have an event going on. You mentioned, in the promo, there's an event going on. Well, for the build event, maybe we should create an event checklist of things that we should do 3 weeks before, 2 weeks before, 1 week before, 1 day before, day of. And those would be a collection of working procedures associated with an event. And then you'd kind of put a bow on it. And then you would go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, as opposed to dividing out by departments. But I think for smaller companies, and of course this depends on who's listening to this, smaller companies have to be scrappier. Like they can't say, hey, we're going to do this 2-year initiative and we're going to invest, $1 million, and we're going to, get everyone involved and get branded T-shirts, and we're all going to fly out and do. Smaller companies, they just have to deal with the reality. The reality is, I have one VA and they're screwing up on the delivery. I need to create a checklist so they don't screw up on the deliveries anymore. There, we got that one done. Hey, that made a big difference. Now let's do the next one. And they don't need to make it into a bureaucratic Fortune 500 kind of initiative where there's SOPs coming out the ears. They can really just focus on what are the fundamentals of our business, and over time we'll build more and more of them. And I think that's part of our approach, why we can work with startups, pre-revenue companies, and also large companies, is that you don't have to. You can start today, like you could start right now. You don't have to plan 6 months in the future and block out a bunch of time and kind of create some major initiative. Small companies can do it. And we, part of our mantra is that the reason why small companies stay small and struggling and big companies are successful and profitable, like one of the reasons, and one of the key differences between them is that big successful companies have their systems documented and small ones don't. And so if you would like to go from small and struggling to big, just get started. Why don't you write a procedure? And then you'll refine it over time. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. Actually, it won't be perfect the first time. And so that gives people the freedom to take those first steps.
Do you ever get met with any, like, probably not if they've hired you on as a consultant, they're ready to change something, but I'm curious, do you ever get met with any hesitation or pushback from these leaders where it's like, well, if you need to stop doing the thing, make a, write out a system for it, write out a process. And they say, I don't have time because I have to do the thing.
That's the most common issue.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why one of our services is we actually will document the systems for the company, right?
Gotcha.
So because that's the most common thing. It does take time, and the more blue collar the industry, the less the people involved are going to be comfortable writing out their processes because they're just not used to working and writing in that way. So if we work with a law firm, they're okay with it because they're used to writing and they're used to kind of more of a white collar high tech industry. If you work with somebody who runs an oil change place, they're like a little more. They're not really comfortable doing that. They're not used to working on the computer, and so they have a hard time with documenting their procedures. And so there is a difference in industry, but also it does take time. And so we try to say if you spend an hour a week on this, then that's all you need to do. So just spend some time every week, and then you're going to see some improvement every week. And then eventually it's going to once the flywheel's moving, you're going to get some more and more momentum. And so our big approach is don't try to get this initiative done in let's just say 60 days. Say you're going to kick off this initiative and it's going to be a new way of doing business and it won't have an ending. It's just going to be the way we do business. And then there's not this pressure where you're going to have all-nighters and weekends and just pushing really, really hard to get a bunch of stuff documented because and I've done initiatives where this happens is if you get 500 procedures written in 3 months, you get no absorption. Like people aren't going to do it anyways. They just spent a bunch of time writing a bunch of stuff. But if you say, what's your biggest problem? And you work on that procedure and you see it fixed, well, great. Now you move on to the next one and then you move on to the next one. And then it's not so much about the quantity of procedures. It's more about, would you like your department to run better? Would you like to be promoted in the future? Would you like to have an increase in pay? Would you like to have, more vacation time? Well, if you would, then we need to make your department better. And let's just start. So it really is not just about the owner. It's about everybody having the opportunity to being a part of building something great and realizing that their work is not going to, like their work has a legacy to it. Like their work has some foundation to it. And so people actually end up liking it once they understand the methodology and once they understand the long-term benefit. But as the owner, you're going to have to kind of cut some of the pressure down on some of the urgent things. And you might say, hey, yeah, your email's blowing up. You got a bunch of emails coming in. It's urgent. But every Tuesday from 8 to 9 a.m., we work on our systems. So turn that off, work on your systems, and then get back to work. But so they have to know that the owner and the managers have set aside that time for them, that golden hour for them each week where they can actually focus on the infrastructure of what they do. And that needs to be carved out, that protected space. If it's not, then the tyranny of the urgent will always take over and they won't get anywhere.
It sounds morbid, but it makes sense. It makes complete sense. I mean, again, just going back to the fact that there's only so many hours in a week, it makes complete sense. Now, how minute, or I guess to change that, is there any benefit with just starting with high level procedures? Let's say like And I mean more of like the documentation of it. Let's say, if we're talking to e-commerce owners, maybe PPC, hey, do we have to say like, I sign in, I use this username password to sign in, I click on these steps, or can I say, hey, I just go and I check these certain pages, these are the key things that I'm looking at, and this is what my thought is on it. I guess
Yeah.
where do you how do you write that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's different types of procedures. Most people think of the procedure as a how-to, like how to bake a cake. Step
Mhm.
1, step 2, step
Mhm.
3, chronological, and that is most things. But there are some things that are just a checklist where a pilot doesn't need to have a, a 500 step process on how to fly an airplane. They just need a checklist like, hey, before you take off, check these boxes, right?
Mm.
That's something that they've done again and again and again, but they might forget something. And if they forget something, it's catastrophic. So they need to follow a checklist, right? And that could be,
Mhm.
for someone who's a seasoned expert in something, yeah, they've done it 100 times, but this checklist protects them, and it's a double check for them or the person who's involved, who gets handed it over next time. The next kind of a process was called the process outline, which would outline something at a high level, like, hey, we hire employees here. Here's our process. First, we kind of gather a bunch of resumes using this website. Then we keep them in this folder for someone to review them. They clean them up, and then we go and we test them. Drug tests, typing tests, whatever it is. We give this kind of high level outline, and it's something that we repeat every single time. It takes place over 60 days. There's different people involved. That's an outline procedure. And then the one that you mentioned is what we call a guideline procedure. So a guideline procedure is a narrative that explains. It's kind of like a white paper. It's like an internal white paper. So companies we work with typically have design guidelines or investment guidelines or communication guidelines. So you would have PPC guidelines. What are our PPC guidelines? Well, our PPC guidelines is that we check these things, focus on these things, always study up on these things, and it's kind of like a guideline for anybody engaged in PPC in your business. Kind of would just know the guideline, know the strategy, know the high level thinking. It wouldn't be tactical. It wouldn't like tell you exactly what to do, but it would tell you the tactical or the strategic high level thinking of that particular department. So that's a very common type of procedure to write as well. And also when you're writing things, because you can say high level, is always think who is going to be the next person doing this task, or who's going to be the next person. Like if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, who would they bring in to do this? And writing with that level of specificity. So
Mhm.
if you're going to be bringing on in somebody who has 10 years PPC, uh, history, and they're going to come and then handle the PPC for your business. Well, the way you write that procedure is very different than if I'm going to, if I bring in my 16-year-old son and say, hey, you're going to handle PPC. Well, the procedure I write for him is going to be very different because he has no idea what he's
Mhm.
doing, right? And so you're going to have to write it for an off the street person, the next person in line to take over that particular task, or the person who would take over that task if you were sick, or if you want to do cross training, write it with that person in mind. And a simple way to do it for things that are high tech, things that are web based, computer based, is just to do a screen capture, just to do a loom and just say, hey, here's what I do each morning to check our PPC. You hit record,
Mhm.
you walk through it, you save it, it's in a folder. Great. That's the beginning of a procedure. And then as someone else gets trained on it, then you say, hey, can you write down the highlights into a document? And then we're gonna, a few months later, we'll study it, and then maybe we'll refine it and add a few more things. And then it gets to get better and better and better with time, as opposed to one guy really knows it, and then all of a sudden he gets COVID and he's sick for 2 weeks. It gets
Mm.
totally screwed up. He comes back, resurrects it. It gets better and better. But then he leaves the company. And then it's like, well, so how do we do that? Well, no one
Yeah.
really knows, So if they just would have recorded it once, at least you'd have a starting place of a process. And I think that's where a lot of companies, especially those who are web based, probably your market, start off is just by screen recording the separate things that their team does.
And where do you recommend that businesses keep this information? Like,
Mhm.
is there like, is Google Drive usually sufficient, or like what's the one Carlos loves? Process.st?
Oh,
Process
I
Process
forgot
Street.
what it was called.
Yeah, Process
Yeah.
Street. Yeah, that's what Carlos Alvarez uses with his business. Do you have a
Yeah.
recommendation or like a best practice?
Yeah, I do know that a lot of Amazon companies or companies that are in the e-commerce space do use Process Street. So that's a great software. Suite Process is great. Confluence. A lot of people use it. Those who are really small end up using Dropbox or Google Drive.
Mhm.
Those who are focused on team training, I really like the software Trainual. Sam Carpenter's business partner has a software called uh, it's called businessdocumentationsoftware.com. So BDS. And so that's a
Okay.
great software as well. So there's a lot of softwares. When I work with companies, I don't say, hey, use this software. Instead, I will say, let's see what your needs are, with
Mhm.
regards to command, control, privacy, protection, HIPAA laws, ease of use. Do you need it mobile friendly? Like all the stuff, printing, physical, because there's a need for physical copies of procedures sometimes. So once we kind of figure out the needs, in the automation and the team, then we say, okay, now here's some options.
Mhm.
Then pick options of softwares that are popular, that have been doing it a long time, and then I'll typically have those who are the decision makers play around with 2 or 3 softwares for a week, and then we pick one. But it's not something you want to do lightly, because
Mhm.
once you're in there, you really want to stick there a long time, and it's not easy to get everyone on the same kind of software. But the simple choice for those just getting started would just be, if you already have a server you use, or a Google Drive of that kind that you already use, just start with that. It's If everyone's already used to it, then just start there, and just whatever folder system your company already used, just create a folder called Working Procedures or SOPs. Start saving things there, and then over time you might come up with a more robust place to save these things.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
And so where can people buy the book?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would just go to Amazon, Kindle, any of the places books are sold. You can get the fourth edition of Sam's book, and so that would be where I go.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome.
You had one more question,
But
Francois. Sorry.
yeah, I in regards to oh shit, I just completely blanked on it.
There it goes. Bye-bye.
Lisa, this is
It's
your fault.
gone. No, certainly is not.
What was it?
Process Street,
I
Google
it might
Drive.
it might come
Uh,
back to me.
okay. Well, while you
Yeah.
chew on that for a while, Josh, what does kind of an ideal client look like for WTS Enterprises for the consulting that you do?
Yeah, sure. Uh, I'd call them a mature business owner. So it doesn't mean that they need to be in business a long time, but they need to be mentally mature. Maybe they've gone through a few ups and downs. Maybe they've had a few scars, and they realize, okay, it's time to do things differently. Like they're ready to make a change. They're ready to scale their business and get out of the day to day. And once they've mentally determined that they do want that kind of lifestyle, and then it's worth coming to WTSenterprises.com, and then
Mhm.
they can do one of the group coaching programs I do. They can do one of the consulting programs that we do, where we actually document your systems for you. Or if you are interested in being a consultant like me, there's more people out there than just me who do this. Then I certify consultants in this methodology. So then they take it to their vertical industry. One of them specifically, we certified recently, Joseph. He works with e-commerce businesses, helps gets their procedures documented so that they can sell. And that's specifically what he focuses in on. And so he just found this was the best methodology to get the systems done, so that they could sell for top dollar. And so,
Mm.
yeah, so I'm interested in getting that. I'm always looking for new consultants who want to get certified.
Beautiful. And
I
how long does the oh, did you remember it?
I do remember it. Yeah, if
Go.
it just a
Go.
sec. I think a big part of when business owners are growing and they're scaling is they're testing out new methods, right? It could be, hey, let's try out Facebook ads, let's try Instagram ads, whatever the case is. As they're testing out these different campaigns and strategies, would you recommend that they document that? Or would, like, for example, if I saw that Facebook ads didn't work a month later and I spent all this time systemizing it and documenting it, it might piss me off. But would you would you recommend them actually documenting it, even if it might not work for them?
Great question. And I would say no. The more ephemeral or the more likely the things are to change, the less effort you want to spend documenting it.
Yep.
So if you're going to say, hey, I'm running experiment number 27 with Facebook, you record how you're doing it. This is what I'm trying. And we'll touch base in a month and see if this works. Great. Like you just recorded yourself doing it. You're not going to take the time to train the team. You're not going to take the time to document every single step. You're not going to take the time to really get into the nuance of that. But just getting a record of it is a good idea. But beyond that, I wouldn't go beyond that because, of course, yeah, someone's going to get really annoyed if they spend all the time doing that and then no one ever uses it. And so it's more for the things you have figured out and for the things that you're going to do again and again and again. So let's just say that it's not a wild experiment, but it's just something that you typically do. Like you mentioned, the daily PPC routine of getting in the morning and checking the certain things each morning when you wake up in the morning. Well, that's a standard routine that you want to get better at, faster at, sharper at, and also someone else could do it for you at some point in time and just give you a report. Well, because it's routine in your business, that makes sense to document. If it's just, hey, we're gonna spend $5,000 and just buy these ads on TikTok. Well, I don't even know if TikTok does ads, but let's just say you just buy. Okay, they do. Okay, I'm not on the platform, but so you just try it. Well, no need to document that, but you might want to record yourself doing it so that 2 months later, when someone's like, "What did you do? How did you do that?" and then you at least say, "Well, here's this little recording. We could at least check and then improve upon it." I think most people don't understand is that people's memories are way worse than they think they are, and their ability to communicate what they do to someone else is typically done through osmosis, and things are always lost. And then if you're communicating to somebody and then they're communicating to someone else, even more will get lost. And so this allows you to prevent that game of telephone where things kind of get lost along the way. And then you as the owner are like, well, I should just do it myself because as soon as I pass it on, they get screwed up. And it's because you didn't take the time to encapsulate what you did in a medium that doesn't allow for dilution.
And Loom is free, I think, right? Up to a certain threshold, Loom is free. So I mean, you could record yourself doing anything for hours, and you could probably have different playback speeds and everything. So yeah, that's a great idea. We'll start incorporating that into because we run different experiments all the time. Maybe we could start incorporating that into our routine. It's not just one more thing to do. It's one thing less that we have to do in the future.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and you could just have a folder called experiments and you could just date it, January 25th, 2022, experiment 27. And just list them.
It would be so helpful to be able to see all the stuff that you do when we come in on a Monday and you're like, I have these 7 project ideas. And I'm like, what happened? Where is this coming from? It would be helpful. Yeah, so we need to start looming. Well, Josh, I guess the final question that I had was, how long does this process kind of take? And I know that's a it depends question, but I mean, on average, like what should a business owner kind of bargain for as far as the time commitment to really implement the systems mindset?
Yeah, a good question. All of our programs, and we've tested this out over 10 years, are 4 months because it takes a little bit of time to absorb this new way of thinking, a little bit of time to refine and move your strategy a few degrees this way and a few degrees that way. It takes a little bit of time to get that sorted out, to kind of cleave off the things that are wrong. It takes time to get the team on board. It takes time to get some of your big wins in place. And it takes time to run those systems long enough to get a feedback loop on what's working and get a feedback loop on how to update what you've already done and to actually have to maintain a few things. So we tell people, if you can just stick with this program for 4 months and make it a way of doing business, then it can last forever. But those first 4 months are key. You don't want to start for a month and then stop, because then you have to just start all over again. And you don't want your team to kind of lose faith in you as the leader of someone who said, we're going to do this. And then, 2 months later you stop. So we say kind of be pretty intentional for 4 months, having everyone involved, and then it should stick. And then it should just get better and better and better with time. In terms of, getting your whole business documented, Centratel, which is what the book workflow system is based on, they're still documenting procedures 20 years later. So they're still updating things, refining things, maintaining things, measuring, tweaking. It's always happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always competition, regulation. There's in new innovations, new technology. There's always things happening, so you can't ever stop. But the core things can get done in 4 months. All the things that are really make up your whole business probably within 6 months, and then it gets really much more into maintenance. Bigger companies take longer than smaller companies, but in the end, once you're over the hill, and I would say that happens after 4 months, things just get easier and easier and easier, and then it's just about maintenance.
Gotcha. It's like a lifestyle change instead of a fad diet.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We will put a link to the book in the description of the video, and then again, we'll pop it up on the screen. If you guys are interested in working with Josh or any of the other consultants on his team, you can reach out at WTSenterprises.com. I assume there's a form they can fill out there, Josh?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So depending on when people actually watch this recording, we have a systems assessment that's going live in the next week. And then, of course, we have a summary of the book at WTSenterprises.com. So if you don't want to read the whole book, you can get the summary there. And also we have other tools and podcasts. And, we got a live event coming up in a few weeks here. So there's always something going on. We're trying to help business owners go from working in the business to working on the business to owning the business. And so, just go to the site.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you for everybody who tuned in. If you guys liked what you heard today, be sure to give us a thumbs up, comment with your thoughts, share this episode with your friends, subscribe to the show, and be sure to turn on those notifications. And that way you never miss a conversation with leaders in supply chain and e-commerce like Josh Fonger. Josh, thank you again so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone.
Bye,